Here we go. Now we're live. So I know I've read through your discussion boards already for this week. I just want to get you guys' take again. I don't want to talk for the whole hour here, but somebody talk me through what you have found in your investigation of budgets in higher education for the last 3 years. Who's going to volunteer? Don't be shy. Okay, I'll throw you guys a softball. Who found that budgets had increased significantly over the last 3 years?
Well,
come on, Kevin, take a stab.
Okay. I found tuition has increased over the last 3 years.
Correct.
To the tune of about 21%.
Absolutely.
Between 2014 and 2016, and I looked at the LSU A&M budget, or the financial reports for 3 years. So yes, the tuition certainly increased due to the GRAD Act, I believe, is called. Or that's what I put in my paper. But so yeah, I did notice that tuition increased. I didn't see a lot of decrease in state appropriations for those 3 years. Of course, the previous 3 years might have been a drastic cut, from the state. But I just found it interesting for those 3 years, 2014 through 2016, that we had, quite a bit of a tuition increase. There's not a lot of student increase at that particular campus. In fact, there was a reduction, if I recall, on at least one of those years. And at the same time, there wasn't a big decrease in state appropriations. So it just made me curious. But again, there's, a lot of other things. There were scholarships certainly increased. And, I found, that just looking now at my report, the conditions that could have an effect within the LSU system, not necessarily A&M, but the entire system. And there's a whole list of changes that could certainly, change up could have an effect on the financial position of that system or that college.
So I've written down 3 things that Kevin just said, and I really would love to teach an intro to higher ed class or a higher ed topics class, because there's so many interesting things. Higher ed stayed the same, very much the same, for years and years and years. And in the last 5 to 7 years, higher ed has changed exponentially. It has gone so fast. It's one of the fastest changing industries, because you've had the rise of for-profit institutions, you've had the rise of online learning, you've had competency-based learning. I mean, there's so many changes. You've had a reduction in state appropriations, so you're running a quasi-private institution like we talked about. So I'm just going to talk about 3 things that Kevin mentioned. I'm going to start with state appropriations, and perhaps I'll go back to announcements. I'm sorry, I forgot to say this. So I recorded the session last week, and I'm actually going to put it all on mute real quick if I can. This was working so beautifully last week, and I don't know why I've stopped this week. Can everybody go in and mute their
oh, yeah.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. So state appropriations. Back to my video. So I videoed last week, and what I have to do is create a YouTube channel. And if I can create the YouTube channel, then I can upload my videos. So what I'm going to do is upload last week's video, upload this week's video, and then I'm going to make you some videos on law in higher education, because we don't have enough time to cover everything. And I've got 2 really thick textbooks that cost about $200 each that I didn't want you to have to buy, so I'm just going to talk you through them. So I think that's going to be more beneficial for you than, believe me, these textbooks are are a pretty tough read. If you thought finance was tough, these textbooks are pretty tough too. So I'll do that for you. Hopefully this weekend we have the balloon rally that we all have to be at LSU Shreveport. Shameless plug here. If you've never been to a balloon rally, please go. Be exciting times. So hopefully I'll get that up and running on Sunday. But let's go back to some points that Kevin made. So state appropriations, like we talked about last year, in 2010, just looking at LSU Shreveport, we were operating around a $30 million budget, maybe 30 to 40, depending on what you're including. And we got $18 million from the state and $12 million from tuition and fees. And then you fast forward to 2016, we got $7 million from the state. We're still operating about a $30 million budget. So the $23 million has to come from other resources, mostly tuition and fees. So you've got that going on over here. State funding decreasing, tuition and price increasing. And that's not just in Louisiana. That happened because of the Great Recession all across the nation. So Louisiana is unique. Do I need to tell anybody that? Is anybody surprised by that? Louisiana is one of 2 states where the legislator has to vote on tuition increases. So LSU Shreveport, LSU A&M, Southern University, Northwestern State, Louisiana Tech, any public institution in Louisiana cannot set its own tuition rates. So if we wanted to say, you know what, the state's cut our funding, we need to make up the difference from in tuition dollars, we need to raise tuition prices. We don't have the authority to do that. That is controlled by the legislator. Is this news to anybody? Did anybody know this? Yep. News. So that is why every legislative session we actually try to get the management boards to be able to have control over tuition authority. So when I talk about management boards, I talk about the LSU system, the UL system, the Southern system, and the community college systems. So we would like for the systems to be able to set tuition. The legislature voted that down. So they have to have a 2/3 approval for us to be able to increase tuition. So the people who are voting on us being able to increase tuition are also the people who are your legislators out in the community who are hearing from you and families that, boy, we can't afford the tuition increase, and we voted you into this position to take care of us and not tax us. And so there's a real struggle between being able to operate in higher education and who is funding higher education. And like I said, Louisiana is one of 2 states that they have to have legislative approval. And I think maybe Louisiana is the only one where you have to have a 2/3 vote or 2/3 majority to get that approved. So back, I think it was in 2011, we put in, and we're going to talk a little bit about this today, the journal critique is about headcount funding versus performance funding. So remind me to come back and talk about that. Maybe I need to put a note down. So we put in what was called the GRAD Act. And the GRAD Act moved from headcount funding, which talks about inputs. How many people do you have enrolled at your institution? And you get your cut of state dollars based on the number of students enrolled. To performance funding, where you only get your tuition increase, or you only get a piece of the pie for funding if you meet certain performance outcomes. So you've gone from inputs of headcount to outputs of performance and student achievement. And so the GRAD Act in theory was really good. We will allow institutions, and I'm really summarizing this down to the very basics here. We will allow institutions to increase tuition if they have an 80% success rate on these student performance metrics. And the performance metrics were first to second year retention, first to third year retention, graduation rates, licensure passage rates, such as nursing passage rates, education passage rates. There were a couple of other metrics that you got to choose. We did retention of transfer students and a different metric for graduation rate, which I won't get into right now. So it made institutions really focus on student success, which was great. Willie, I don't know if you were involved at all in retention projects. I know in amongst the 5 jobs, or the 5 job titles that I do, I'm also the Director of Institutional Research. So I was running retention numbers every day from about the middle of the summer on to try to make sure that we hit our retention numbers for first to second year retention and first to third year retention, to the point where we were offering scholarships for students to come back. We were calling them every day. I mean, it really made us work on getting students back into school, because our entire ability to increase tuition, which meant we could balance our budget, was based on whether or not we met these performance metrics. So I'm going to tell you, in the 2 years that the GRAD Act has been done, I haven't run a retention report and worried about it as I used to do when we had to meet these performance metrics. So it was good and it was bad. If you didn't meet the performance metrics, you couldn't raise tuition, and you also lost 15% of the slice of the pie that you got from the state in tuition dollars or state appropriations anyway. So it was really hurting. LSU Eunice didn't meet their targets one year, and they really, really suffered. So we could do a whole entire class on GRAD Act. Again, this is a 7.5-week class, and we don't have time to get into all the nitty gritty about higher education funding. So if you're interested, if you're super interested, we can have a conversation about it offline. Depends how fully interested in higher ed you are. So that's GRAD Act, and so we were able to increase our tuition dollars, or the amount we charge for tuition, because the legislator said, you know, we're tired of you guys coming back to us every year wanting to increase tuition. Here's a program that we're going to put in place, and if you guys meet these metrics, these performance metrics, then you're automatically going to be able to increase tuition. And we were able to increase tuition up to what is called the SREB average. And so SREB average is the Southern Regional Education Board average. So we were able to increase up to a maximum of 10% every year. So imagine this is going on for 6 years. So we were able to increase tuition every year for 6 years. But all the other schools in the Southern region were also increasing tuition. So we never quite caught up. So it was always this great, we can increase tuition up to 10%. So every year we did, we never met the SREB average. So you as the student got taxed. Instead of the state giving us dollars to operate higher education or our institutions, you guys were paying for it. And again, we talked about last week how that's really changed the model in higher education from us as educators being in the position of authority to now having a more customer service based relationship with students who are now our customers. The last thing I want to comment on what Kevin had said was the enrollment staying pretty much the same, and the scholarship dollar budget increasing. So back again in 2013, the state mandated, we have a board of regents in the state, and then you have your management boards, which are the LSU system and the UL system, the SUSLA system, or the Southern system, and the community college and technical college systems. So the Board of Regents set new admissions policies. And so you also have tiers of schools. So LSU is the flagship, and then you have the Category 2s, which are Lafayette, UNO, and Louisiana Tech. And then you have the regional institutions, which are LSU, LSUS, Northwestern State, ULM, all of those types of institutions. So at each tier, the admission standards go up. And so at the same time as you're getting tuition going up at 4-year schools at a greater rate than at 2-year schools, you now also have admission standards changing. So the amount of students who can pay a 4-year school tuition and who are meeting these admissions requirements is a much smaller pool than those at the 2-year school. So if you've ever looked at 2-year school enrollments in the last 3 or 4 years in the state of Louisiana, 2-year school enrollments have absolutely skyrocketed because the tuition price has been less and the criteria, the admission criteria to enroll has dropped off as well. Or let me rephrase that. The 4-year standards went higher, so there were less students were able to meet those standards. More students fit into that community college model. We could do a whole nother class on effective community college modeling for transfer students like the California system, but again, we don't have time for that here. Ideally, you're going to get students go to a 2-year school and transfer to a 4-year school. What actually happens is they go to the 2-year school and there's not a great transfer out rate in this state, in Louisiana. There's a lot of jobs for students with a 2-year credential versus the 4-year credential. Again, spend a whole nother hour talking about that, but we won't. So I just kind of wanted to tie up everything that Kevin said. And the scholarship budget, our scholarship budgets have absolutely ballooned because we are trying to use more dollars to attract students to come to our 4-year institutions. So we're, again, when tuition has gone up, we're trying to what we call discount the tuition rate to make it affordable for students still. So we've charged a lot more in tuition, but we're actually giving out a lot more in scholarships to try to make it affordable for students. So my question is, there should be some economist who can do this and look at the rate that students are willing to pay for an education, and we should not be raising our tuition prices above that. If you've ever taken an economics class, you draw all of these supply and demand charts. You'll be sick to tears or bored to tears of drawing these supply and demand charts. But there's a point where the supply and the demand cross, and there's a price point in there, which if you go over that price point, then the demand really drops, and that's what we've seen in higher education. So I've just talked probably for 15 minutes. Does anybody have any questions on what I just said? Clear as mud?
Dr. Lessiter.
Yes.
It's Danielle. I have a question for you. I looked at the LSUS budget over the last 3 years, and I put it in my discussion board, but one of the things I noticed was the huge increase in like freshman students that LSUS had, I think in like 2015.
Yeah.
And then it was like 10%, and then like some of the master's programs went up like 150% enrollment. So in a time when we're charging more for tuition and things are going up and it costs more, what was LSUS doing different to grow by 180%?
Yeah, that's a good, thank you for bringing that up, Danielle. I have read your discussion board, and I meant to take some notes to talk about that as well. So I'll tell you, that was our biggest freshman class that we've had in a long time. So I'll talk about freshmen first. Because one of my other jobs is the Vice Provost of Enrollment Management, so I oversee the enrollment side of things as well. And so in 2015, we entered into a program or an agreement with the state called the pilot program. So this allowed freshmen who didn't meet the admission standards but were within 2 points of the math and English subscore to be admitted to the institution. And about 1/3 of our freshman class met that requirement. So interestingly, in 2016, we lost about 100 students because that pilot program went away for 2 points. It was just down to 1 point. So when I'm talking about increased admission standards, and you talk about, I was down in Baton Rouge on Monday, and I was listening to the Commissioner of Higher Ed. I was at a meeting for chief academic officers, and he came to talk to the group, and he said that, interesting stat, 53% of high school graduates in Louisiana need a developmental course. And when you look at the four-year regional institutions like LSUS, we no longer are allowed to teach remedial education. Remedial education can only occur at the two-year schools and at the HBCUs. Everybody's familiar with HBCU, historically black colleges and universities like Grambling. So 2015 was a real anomaly for us with the freshmen, because we entered into this agreement that allowed us to bring a lot more students into a four-year school than we previously were allowed. 2015, that program went away, and so, well, it didn't go away. It was altered a little bit, and we didn't have as many students. And then for this upcoming year, we hope to hit about 315 first-time freshmen. So that explains that anomaly there. Now, I can tell you what happened at the graduate level as well, which some of you guys have been a part of. If you're in this class, maybe you're a part of as well. So we partnered with an outside entity called Academic Partnerships, and they're a company out of Dallas who, they're essentially a recruiting service. And they find students who want to take online programs. And what Academic Partnerships has done for LSUS is really revolutionize, and when you talk about higher education changing very, very quickly, Academic Partnerships has revolutionized what we've done on our campus, and it's really they've been following the major trends in education, and those major trends are online learning, shortened time frame to learn, so in these 7.5 week sessions, multiple entry points. So we don't only now have a fall and a spring where people come to college. We have multiple points. We have 6 entry points per year, and we have year-round school. And so we offered an MBA program for $10,000 online that people were able to complete within a year. So we have the LSU brand name at a price that people want for a product that people want, if you look at it in marketing terms. And we went from about 63 students in the MBA in 2013 to, I think we're going to have a little over 1,600 in this fall, 2017. So that's great, right? You have 1,600 people in a program, but how do you pay for that? How do you pay for business faculty members to teach classes with 200 students in it? Because if you're anything familiar with higher education and pay scale, boy, there's some disparities. You have business faculty who are all making about 120,000 plus, 140,000, and then you have the liberal arts faculty who are making maybe $45,000. So you have huge growth in a program that's expensive to run. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about that in terms of budgets and how you allocate resources probably next week. So good questions, Danielle. Does that kind of help answer your question at all?
Yeah, I was just curious because I think one was 180%, and the other one was like 130, and I just thought that was huge growth in master's programs. And I think one was the public health, and that had to do with the partnership with the Science Center. So I got that, but the numbers were huge, so I was just curious.
Yeah, interestingly as well, we have a revenue share with Academic Partnerships. So for every student they bring us, we share 50-50 on tuition. So they've brought us 1,600 students, but when you do a 50-50% share on tuition, that's really like only having 800 normal students. So as the interim provost right now, I have people wanting to take their program online, and I've really got to look at the cost of, okay, if you have 200 people in your program right now and it's online, and now you want to go with with AP, these academic partnerships, how do we build enrollment to not only, we're going to have 400 students to match 200 full-paying students, but how do we grow enrollment from 400 to 600 so that we're actually making money to pay for the bigger class sizes? So when you're looking at budgets, nothing's ever simple. You've got to kind of weigh in the cost and the benefits as well. So yeah, enrollment's going up, but how does that affect costs as well? So that's very important to consider. Jeremy, you have a question?
Yeah. Why is it so much different than the faculty salaries? What was because of the load they're teaching, or?
This is really interesting. It's market forces. So I'm trying to think of another industry where there's so much disparity. I really don't. Kevin, is it like that in your industry in policing? Can you unmute? I can probably, yeah.
Okay. So what are we comparing within industries?
Yeah.
Salaries?
Yeah. Do you have a huge disparity of people doing the same job, but just in different areas?
Okay, I'm trying to follow that. You talking about different agencies or within my own agency?
So in business, people are getting paid to teach classes $140,000, and in liberal arts, you're going to make about $45,000. And it's the difference in market forces. So there's a lot less PhDs in business than there are in liberal arts. And so you don't expect as a PhD in, say, English to come out making 80,000. You're going to expect to come out making about 45 to 50,000.
Well, if you look at different, okay, so take Stonewall Police Department, a tiny police department. They're out enforcing the law just like a state trooper would, so to speak. Both of them are enforcing the law, but one of them is making a lot more than the other one.
Right.
Just because we're a state police agency and we pay well. So within our own agency,
the competition's much higher to be a state police officer than a Stonewall police officer, I'm assuming?
Yes, it is. But within our own agency, no, a captain, at Troop G makes exactly what a captain at Troop B in New Orleans makes. Even though that captain may have 50 more troopers and a lot more issues to deal with than the captain at Troop G and my troop does. So, but yeah, it's, we're state employees, so it's all the same across the board, depending on your rank and your seniority.
And Jeremy, to take it a step further, within business, if you're teaching economics, you're probably going to come in at 90,000, but if you're teaching accounting, you're probably coming in at 150,000. And it's interesting because it creates a lot of tension on campus as well. Because if just say you're a biology faculty member and you've got 100 students in your class, and you're teaching a 4-4 load, which is what generally faculty teach, 4 classes in the fall, 4 classes in the spring, and you're making $55,000. And then you've got business faculty who are teaching a 3-3 load because of their accrediting agency standards. So they're teaching 3 classes in the fall and 3 in the spring. And they've got 15 people in their classes. Yeah, that causes a lot of conflict on campus, definitely.
So it's basically due to the demand of the degree, or what they teach.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, something
certainly not that way.
Yeah,
in K-12, it's certainly not that way.
Yeah, never go get a PhD in English if you want to get rich, is what they tell me. There's a lot of money to be made in creative writing, but there's not a lot of money to be made in teaching creative writing. So,
well, hopefully leadership studies will do pretty well.
It's probably middle of the range if you're in an education program. Yeah. There's a great website to look at, higheredjobs.com, and you can just look at the differences in the salaries. They have them organized by discipline, and there's huge disparity. And again, when you look at what we're paying in Louisiana for faculty, it's way lower than, as with most jobs, what they're paying across the nation. So They're very, very interesting. Anybody else have questions? Kevin, I know you had your hand up a time ago.
I did, and it's in reference to private college versus public college. Does and you may or may not know, but you probably do. In the state of Louisiana, do private colleges get funding from the state, or are they strictly on their own?
They are on their own, apart from they get TOPS tuition dollars. Does that make sense? Everybody familiar with the TOPS program?
Yes.
So theoretically, they get state dollars from TOPS funding, but not direct state appropriations.
Okay. I was just curious. I went to Centenary and graduated from there, and I guess just based on tuition and donations, endowments, things of that nature, that's how they get their funding, and none from the state.
Right, correct. And when we get into law, I'm actually not going to talk a whole lot about private institution law, but the law in private institutions has taken a very different track than public institutions. Now, we all have some federal laws that we have to abide by, but in terms of what we have to follow, there's a lot more regulations in a public institution. Tiana? Unmute yourself.
Hello. Sorry for the dim light, but I have a migraine.
Oh,
So.
And the ice cream didn't help.
Oh no, it's helping. It makes me feel better.
Good.
Okay, this is maybe somewhat off topic, but not really. But I got my undergraduate degree also from LSUS, and at that time when I first started, my education, they had a lot of scholarships and stuff to offer for undergrads. Well, when I came back to get my master's, they said LSUS only has one scholarship that you can apply for in the master's program. So, and I also realized that getting your master's is a lot more expensive. So I'm trying to figure out why, I guess my question really is, why do you think that LSUS only has one scholarship for the master's program and they have, more for the undergrads?
Yeah, so I can probably answer your question for you. A lot of what we are judged on is undergraduate numbers. So everything that we do historically has been based on attracting undergraduate students. Now, the meeting that I was in Baton Rouge on Monday was talking about the funding formula. So the state has this big pot of money, and how do they split it up between institutions? And part of the funding formula, which I've been to 4 meetings about the funding formula, and I still don't know that I can tell you how the funding formula really operates. But there's a lot of bonus points to the funding formula, and we actually got a bump in state appropriations this year because of the number of graduate completers, like people who graduate at the graduate level. And we got a lot of bonus points for those students. So yeah, I think I'll tell you this, when our graduate numbers very easily are very close to our undergraduate numbers, we are really focused on building our undergraduate enrollment back to where it needs to be at this point. So apologies for not giving more discounting at the graduate level.
No, it's fine. I just thought there would be more scholarship opportunities because it is a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
For me to get my master's than it was for me to get my bachelor's.
Yep. Remember what I said last week, the next bubble to burst is the student loan bubble.
Yeah.
Hopefully y'all won't be a part of it.
My GI Bill's gone.
All right, I'm going to cover, because I told you guys I wouldn't keep you longer than an hour. You guys don't want to listen to me longer than an hour. So this week, I just want to make sure that we're all clear that there's a discussion board that everybody has done. And then there is the ethics case that I want you guys to read through. So the ethics case I took, again, I hate to make you guys buy $200 books. I think there's so many resources that we can use online nowadays that buying the textbook. If you want a textbook and you're interested in reading these textbooks, let me know. I will tell you the textbook that you should buy for $200. If you don't want to buy it, don't worry about it. But one of these ethics cases, so it's a PDF, so it has a list of questions at the end of it. So these are really thought-provoking questions. I think if you guys watched the ethical videos from last week, we are really following the applied ethics. I think the big thing we have to remember is, it's always my favorite ethical quote, is do no harm. And that's really what I want to focus on for us as educators. So there's going to be a list of questions at the end of the case study. If you can answer those questions, that's a mandatory piece that you have to do this week for points. And then there's the journal critique. So don't forget, 2 of you have already done 1 journal critique, and you get to choose 3. Don't leave it to the last 3. You never know. I may have put the hardest zinger questions in the last 3. So make sure you do them along the way. And for you, Kevin, there's a critique question a journal critique question every week. You don't have to answer it every week. You only have to choose 3, and there's 6. So this week there's a lot of literature on this. This is what I did my dissertation on. I was actually looking at efficiencies in higher ed, and we talk about efficiencies in terms of funding all the time, and our efficiencies we talk about cutting. So one thing I wanted to talk about, when you all noted in your discussion board that our expenditures hadn't decreased, or faculty salaries hadn't decreased, or had decreased. And when you're facing budget cuts, one of the important things to do is make sure that you're still providing the core mission of the institution, which a core mission is to educate students. And so, when I tell you that I've got 4 different jobs, that's because we really felt at LSUS it was important to maintain faculty numbers and perhaps cut back on administrator numbers. And that's the challenging thing, is how do you contain the core mission of the institution and do it well when the amount of money that you're getting and the reporting that you have to do is increasing all the time. So I think that's a really fundamental common issue that you're going to face if you ever get involved in funding of higher education. So that was something I think that all of you noted as well in your discussion board. It is 8:45, and I'm going to see if anybody has any more questions. Anything about higher ed budget this week, funding, grading? How much more painful can this be? No? Very good. So, like I said, I'm going to try to get the YouTube channel up and rolling so that I can put these recordings up there so that you can refer back to them if you need to. I'm also going to try to record some stuff on higher ed law and the changes that we've gone through in the last 10 years or so, and try to make that a little more interesting. We will be doing some case studies on law as well. So again, these topics are pretty dry. If I can try to make them a little bit more exciting, I will. I'm not sure. If you guys have got suggestions on how I can make it more exciting, please let me know. I'm all ears. So anyway, everybody good with being done at 8:45 today? Thumbs up? All right. All right, y'all enjoy your Wednesday, and make sure everybody's done the discussion board. Make sure you respond, and make sure you answer the ethical questions for the week, and then your choice on the journal critique. Okay? All right, well, y'all enjoy your evening, and hopefully your migraine goes away, and the rest of us go to eat some ice cream right now. All right, thank you, guys.